Good to have you back. This is Environmental Intelligence, episode 49 for June 25th, 2026. Your briefing on environmental regulatory, science, and compliance developments that matter for Canadian professionals. Vancouver Port Authority approves Burrard Inlet dredging to allow larger oil tankers starting September. Federal Port Authority approval clears the way for increased tanker loads through Second Narrows, with work slated to begin in September. Limited other Canadian regulatory developments appeared today. Practitioners should monitor federal port and marine terminal environmental assessment processes this week. If you only note one thing today for your compliance calendar, the top item is the federal Vancouver Port Authority dredging approval, with work beginning in September. Immediate action is to review project files for any current or planned marine terminal assessments in British Columbia. Consultants handling federal port projects, marine sediment assessments, and oil transport infrastructure in British Columbia are most affected. The Vancouver Port Authority granted permission to dredge beneath the Second Narrows Bridge in Burrard Inlet. Dredging will enable larger oil tankers to increase loads through the passage. No information was provided on project duration or sediment management requirements. This directly affects environmental assessments and compliance programs for marine terminals and pipeline-related infrastructure in British Columbia. Consultants should confirm whether additional federal review under the Impact Assessment Act or Fisheries Act applies to associated works. Next steps include tracking the September construction start and any associated monitoring conditions. The Federal Port Authority approved dredging in Burrard Inlet to accommodate larger oil tankers. Work is scheduled to begin in September. This creates immediate compliance considerations for any overlapping marine or sediment projects in the area. There's a nuance here worth understanding on federal dredging projects. A proponent submits a dredging application for a British Columbia coastal terminal and assumes standard Tier 1 sediment screening will suffice for federal approval. In practice, federal port projects trigger additional evaluation of contaminant, bioavailability, and transport pathways that provincial CSR protocols alone do not address. Experienced assessors recognize that historical industrial inputs in Burrard Inlet often produce heterogeneous contaminant profiles that single-point sampling misses, requiring targeted coring and elutriate testing to predict water column impacts during dredging. The key distinction lies in distinguishing between total concentrations and the bioavailable fraction that actually drives Fisheries Act or CPA risk determinations. The mistake I see most often is relying solely on bulk chemistry results without confirming whether the proposed dredge prism intersects known historical fill or spill zones. The fix is straightforward. Integrate existing sediment quality data from prior port studies into the sampling design before submitting the application. If you are working on current or planned British Columbia marine terminal projects, review them for overlap with the approved Burrard Inlet dredging. Confirm whether additional sediment or water quality monitoring conditions apply to any active federal port files. Brief clients on potential schedule implications from the September dredging start in Vancouver Harbour. Update internal checklists for federal port environmental assessments to include increased tanker load scenarios. Mark your calendar for September when Vancouver Port Authority dredging work begins in Burrard Inlet. Monitor Federal Port Authority notices for any additional environmental conditions attached to the approval. Tomorrow, watch for further Federal Port Authority notices on environmental conditions for this approval. That covers today's environmental intelligence. If you found this useful, share it with a colleague who needs to stay current. We'll be back with the next briefing. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets. Each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents for Beginners. Artificial Intelligence Explained Simply for Beginners and Curious Teens. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.